Friends over at Deepwater Wind. I am Josh Fenton. This is Cha-Ching, the money man, Gary Sasse. Gary, thank you for breaking away from watching all the World Cup soccer that I know you've been digesting over the past couple days. Little inside joke, where'd you go to play football? Was it Bryant? Where'd you play football?
No, Sisters of the Poor.
Sisters of the Poor? Where'd you play football?
Florida State.
Florida State, big SEC. Is that an SEC?
ACC.
Oh, you're an A, right? Atlantic Coast Conference, right?
We have the academic schools.
You played with Charlie Ward.
Charlie Ward's 20 years after me. But, no, we have all the academic schools. Duke, North Carolina, Virginia. AC has LSU, Mississippi State. That's just to put it in perspective for you.
It was a chaotic, disturbing, bizarre end to the legislative session. According to the sources up in the beautiful marble dome up on Smith Hill, the last day and a half was primarily delayed, not over the budget, somewhat over the Paw Sox, but on a strange, bizarre trade-off between the Fenton Tower legislation needed to be able to consolidate the land on 195 that Senate President Dominic Ruggiero wanted, and a really anti-business piece of legislation flagged by a lot of different business folks that Speaker Nick Mattiello wanted. I've been around a while. I've never seen a tiny little bill being traded off against a giant bill in all my years. Do you have any sense of what goes on up there in these final days?
You know, it's like the man said, just picture a meat grinder and somebody's putting the pork pieces in and it comes out as nice clean sausage, you know, wrapped and ready to fry. No, that's typical, you know, end of session. I get a kick though, the speaker, now that he's in a race with Steve Frias, one of his selling points is that he's been pro-business and good for the economy and is more moderate or conservative Democrat. And yet at the end of the session, he was pushing a bill that, which I am not an expert on, but by every account is one of the most anti-business bills imaginable. So it's hard to understand. As far as the Senate President, you know, trading off, you know, getting a building in, that's a lot of construction jobs.
Yeah.
So it's obvious.
Well, that one, the Fenton Tower makes sense. That's the traditional year, end of the year kind of bill. Listen, I'm for development. I'm for more jobs. I want to push this through. It's a needed amendment to the 195 statute. Okay, that makes sense. The other hang-up, obviously, Thursday into Friday was the Paw Sox legislation. I think collectively a lot of people held their nose and voted aye on it to sort of demonstrate that Rhode Island wasn't going to go away without a fight. It's I think from a perspective of even some of the strongest advocates for funding of the Paw Sox Stadium and producing the $40 million, it is a very, very strange way to finance it. Seems to put a lot of extra financing costs. Some folks are saying the Senate analysis said as much as $80 million in additional costs.
$87 million.
$87 million in additional financing costs. Well, is that just, you talk about the sausage making, is that just an example of all the sausage making going wrong?
No, there was an issue that the speaker was very concerned about, and understandably, he did not want the state government to backstop this program at all. And so to avoid the backstop, he had to come up with selling non-recourse bonds where the state only commits that the revenues generated in the TIF, the tax improvement zone, would be used to pay. And that's a risky proposition because Pawtucket for the last 50 years has not been an astounding example of economic development, and it's going to depend that there is development that's on schedule and at a time with the building of the stadium, so revenues are generated. And the speaker is right. There is not any financial risk to the state from non-recourse bonds, but there are other risks. And
let me just jump on that issue before you go to the next. The governor, after this financing structure was announced, said, Well, you know what? The state's not going to avoid that risk, right? We can call them non-recourse bonds. We can be charged a lot more in the financing structure. But if the Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency goes down the drain and the city of Pawtucket has to jump in there, the state of Rhode Island's going to end up.
No.
Why?
That's not something, isn't it? Because in the analysis that the Senate passed out the night the bill was passed, they had two boxes, what the risks were under the Senate proposal and what the risks were under the House proposal. There were two risks under the Senate proposal. We would have to pay as a backstop, and there were reputational risks.
Right.
They also said that there were reputational risks involved with the House's proposal. If there's a reputational risk, then you don't know where that ball game is going to end, because you can only stand so much, of goodwill, so much harm to your goodwill. So technically, the speaker's right. They're non-recourse bonds. If something goes bad, the state doesn't have to pick up a finger. But if the state's reputation is ruined,
so the governor's somewhat right on that.
Well, nobody knows, but its common sense indicates it's a concern that the governor expressed. The other concern, which you guys pointed out in one of your stories, was the deal that was cut by to build the stadium in
San Diego, right?
San Diego. Yeah, those were authority bonds. The authority, for whatever reason, I don't know the details, went out of business and had a successor agency, and the courts ruled that those bonds could not be passed on as an obligation to the successor agency, and the taxpayers in San Diego ended up paying the bill.
And
now, who was the principal in that?
I believe Governor Brown was one of them.
No, who was the principal owner?
Oh, Larry Lucchino and the San Diego Padres.
So he has some experience.
Yes, no, he's deep. You name the financing scheme, he's done it at one place or another.
But what the speaker was very concerned about, for whatever reason, he did not want the state to be the explicit backstop. It may be an implicit backstop here. We don't know.
I get that, and I see his thought process, and it was an attempt to mollify critics. But it appears to be that the solution actually doesn't A, have that function in perpetuity, and B, is so expensive that the entire project needed to be rethought.
Well, 87. Anywhere I've seen figures as low as 54 million.
Yeah.
And I've seen figures as high as 87 million. So if you just take the middle ground, you're looking at another $70 million in spending. At that point, when you do your cost-benefit analysis, we're just paying a tremendous premium for not being a backstop, and it may have made more economic sense to bite the political bullet if you want to go forward with the project. Take the hit and do it.
But any number of the owners of the Pawtucket Red Sox could sign personally and satisfy some of the responsibility. I guess some people in Rhode Island are struggling with, why is it all the state's responsibility to guarantee this when you have a extremely well-heeled group of private owners who are going to realize the greatest benefit of this. Yes, we're going to be able to go see a Pawtucket Red Sox game, and yes, we'll be able to get a hot dog and popcorn. But at the end of the day, all the value added to this goes in the pockets of this ownership consortium, who have an estimated value. John Henry's worth $2 to $3 billion. Tom Ryan's worth upwards of $1 billion. Paul Salem's worth around $1 billion. I mean, this seems to be tomfoolery, financial tomfoolery at its absolute best.
Well,
Listen, the numbers I'm throwing out for the money man, that's chump change. It's change off the top of your dresser.
But there's two reasons, and one is if you want to take advantage, which they're not now. That's why it's so much more expensive. Of your tax-exempt bonds,
right?
The state has to back them up. That's pretty obvious. The second, and this is what the
coupled with not only tax-exempt bonds, but also the state's borrowing power and a preferred rate.
But keep in mind that this project, if you put it in the scope of the $1.8 billion in state tax-supported debt, another $5 billion in quasi-independent agency debt, this wasn't a big amount of money, and so I have to believe that the perception of the backstop was more than the economic reality of backing these bonds up, because worst case scenario, this wasn't going to break the state. but they decided that because of 38 studios and other reasons, they didn't want to use the state, put the state in any kind of position of backing it up. What they left on the table, and which no one understands, if anybody tells you they can tell you which way it'll float, they can't, is how you manage reputational risk. That's very hard to know, because if there's an entity in your state that goes bankrupt, there is a reputational risk, and that reputational risk doesn't legally obligate you, and they're different from moral obligation bonds. These non-recourse bonds are well understood, so it doesn't obligate you to do anything. But if the rates go up on a town 20 miles away because Rhode Island has a reputational problem, or it affects a business that's thinking about...
Listen, you can see it 4 years from now, the whole thing falling apart, and some new speaker is going to go down to New York and have his meetings with Standard & Poor's and Fitch and Moody's, just like Mattiello did post-Fox, and come back and say, hey, listen, we don't have a moral obligation, we don't have a legal obligation, but we have a reputational obligation, and it's going to cost us 4 grades on our bond rating. We've got to back these bonds up.
And that was the worst snow job ever put on the people, because we did some independent work with some bond people who actually understood the market.
Right.
It was kind of philosophical economists, and said, what would be the impact on the state if we defaulted on the moral obligation bonds? And there would have been an impact. It would have cost us money, but in 3 years we would not have known going forward, because of Rhode Island bonds and the smart things and value. But we made that decision, and the most difficult place to be, if you're one that disagrees with it and you see the financial difficulties here, is you still have to be a kind of a homer right now, because we've made our bed, and it's better that we're successful than unsuccessful. So you have to root for this thing to go forward. I don't know what Worcester's proposal is, but it can't be any worse than this one.
No, because this one doesn't have a big upside for the Paw Sox owners either.
Oh, and also if you look at the annual revenue requirements from the owners and from the team, you look at the cost of issuance and these things, there are additional cash obligations of the owners, as well as the state and the city of Pawtucket and the redevelopment authority. So it's the deal we have. I would not have done the deal this way. May not have done the deal the Senate's way, but I'll say the one thing for the Senate's deal, it was much more transparent.
Absent their first hearing, which was maybe one of government at its worst, where they stacked the deck for 3 hours and froze out opponents. After that, they sort of cleaned up their act. They backed things up. They posted all the documents. They responded to questions from the media. I thought they did a pretty decent job after that first misstep.
And I think their proposal, I didn't agree with that as a public policy, but it was clear. You knew what the costs were going to be. You knew what the contingent liabilities were. It was all out there. And you weren't dealing with that large a project where, even if you ideologically and philosophically had problems with it, that you had to worry about impacting the states so negatively.
Absolutely.
But it was, the best way to go, as we've talked before, is put in the infrastructure and let the private investor put in the facility.
Despite all the races going on, the mega race is the governor's race. The mega race part 2 might be Nick Mattiello and Steve Frias. Steve Frias lost by under 90 votes last time. Since then, the speaker's had a number of miscues. The Frank Montanaro tuition debacle, hiring Ed Coutinho's son to his staff, the Paw Sox negotiations, this insurance bill. He's got a Board of Election issue still pending. This race is going to have everything you want in a House race. What's your take on all this over the next few months? Rock'em sock'em robots?
Well, this is the typical Tip O'Neill statement that's always said, that all politics is local. So, not living in that district or not walking in that district, I can't tell you how Mary and Joe feel about the speaker. But I think there's a tremendous potential here for the speaker to be defeated. I think at this point, if you were handicapping the race, you'd have to call it a toss-up. I don't think anybody really knows which way it's going to fall. But the speaker has a record now. He's been speaker for 6 years. He came in as an economic development speaker, a reform speaker, and you look at the record now, and after 6 years to stay in power, you have to make certain trade-offs. He's made those trade-offs, and we'll see how popular they are in that district.
Big money going to get spent? You talked to all those highfalutin Republicans. Is this going to be Is dark money going to come in from out of state? I mean,
Well, I don't know where the dark money may come from, but how much did the speaker spend on that race last time?
a couple $100,000.
That's a lot for a legislative seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, the Friars can't spend a couple $100,000, but
But does he need to? I mean, listen, name recognition, they're both at 100%.
Well,
Frias has been walking, as what we're told, pretty regularly.
yeah, he has been, and so he'll be out. He's known in the district. Your own polling suggests, and we'll find out if it translates into election returns, that the Paw Sox deal is not very popular. Though it's interesting, we do a lot of unpopular things, whether it was 38 Studios, the Paw Sox deal, and yet it doesn't seem to have a big impact on success electorally in the subsequent election, except in 1 or 2 or 3 places. And this may be one of the places.
This may be, when you get a toss-up race and then you pile on with an issue as well. Let's talk about the governor's race. I mentioned to you before we came on, at 12 noon today, we already had 11 press releases from the different campaigns announcing things, claiming things about opponents, filing things against opponents, you name it. Even Ann Armstrong announced her candidacy at 3:41 a.m. this morning. She's a pro-legalization of marijuana candidate. I got to tell you, I think they're going to punch themselves out. What was the thrill in Manila when George Foreman threw so many punches? But they're all throwing so many punches. Are they going to just exhaust everyone before this campaign takes place?
So we have 2 people running in the Democrat primary.
2 viable. There's 3, but there's 2 that certainly.
Who's the third one?
Spencer Dickinson.
Oh, Spencer's a good guy. I've worked with Spencer.
Yep, lovely guy.
He's a qualified guy. And we have
Matt Brown and Gina Raimondo are the 3 Democrats.
and we have 3 running in the Republican.
Alan Fung, Patricia Morgan, Giovanni Feroci.
Right. And then there's some independents.
Luis Munoz on the independent side, and Joe Trillo.
Yeah, Joe Trillo could be a real spoiler of this. I don't see the other independents having much of an impact. But if your poll was right and Trillo was running between 14 and 16%, that's bad news for whoever the Republican candidate is, because when you have a strong independent or third candidate, it tends to hurt, whether it's in Rhode Island or in Mississippi, it doesn't much matter. It tends to hurt helps the incumbent and hurts the party out of power usually. And so that could shake it up. I think what's been so disappointing about the election, and I don't know if this comes down with mimicking Washington and what the reason is, we really need a good discussion, and maybe I'm a wonk, but we need a good discussion of where the state plans to go. We don't have, it was pointed out last week that the Rhode Island Foundation pointed out that we don't have a health plan for the state. Brown University was like Chicken Little. One day they were going to, partner with the hospital.
One day, Partners Healthcare out of Boston was the most evil institution ever to contemplate even driving through Rhode Island. A couple weeks later, we're getting into bed with them.
Well, it's funny what little research money will do.
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
We need leadership and a plan. We're going to spend $250 million to rebuild our school facilities, which you can certainly make a case for that. But we don't have an education, plan. No one's talking seriously about closing the gap in our inner cities between the minority kids and the majority population, and that's our workforce is going to come from the minority population. This road thing with the tolls, I don't know if anybody's noticed any improvement in their roads. They see some gantries and they know they're inconvenienced, but whether it's leading to better roads, and I will see. Commerce, Rhode Island. The interesting thing about Commerce, Rhode Island, they seem to be stalled. They were successful in the legislative session of having the legislature continue through what they've had, through, I think,
level funded their existing programs.
2020. Well, if these programs are so wonderful, you would think the legislature wouldn't want more of that candy, and they didn't. They don't want. They're not taking candy away from anybody, but they're certainly not opening up the bins at the candy store, and so that raises a question of, are we, have we peaked? Have those programs, peaked? They were put in place over 3 years ago.
Right.
The world has changed a lot in 3 years. The economy has changed a lot in 3 years, and yet I don't hear any new ideas. Yeah, here's some of the same ideas. So we have all these issues. There are no right answers, and you're getting 14 or 15 press releases a day, talking about where a sign. I don't know what you're getting. Who's renting space from who, or where a sign is.
Yeah. Rental space is probably the single biggest issue. I will say this. I don't know, we're into a couple hundred press releases into this gubernatorial campaign so far. I would say the candidate, and it might be the biggest surprise, who substantively puts out issues, whether you agree with them or not, has been Joe Trillo. Joe Trillo actually once, twice, 3 times a week sends out functionally policy statements on different things. Almost all the other press releases are attacks or announcements, but never. And also, what's also interesting is no one has ever sent out a press release congratulating one of the others on any idea or thought or anything else. That's getting more and more divisive by the second. Is part of it, it's very interesting. For the most part, low unemployment. We've talked about these factors all the time. And you've got a governor who is stuck in the low 30s. Is part of this, the energy, the frustration, the aggressiveness, tied to the fact that most of these candidates, whether they are electable or not, think they're electable?
Well, you wouldn't run unless you thought you could win. You wouldn't play the game and thought you had a chance, even though you were underdog. I think maybe people are working. Maybe they're focusing on what's really important, how their families are doing,
right.
What they're doing, and you don't underestimate Rhode Island voters. I mean, they can see BS when it's out
right.
there, and so they hear Joe fighting with John, and some guy sitting in Cranston somewhere says, "Oh, this guy rented space cheap," and the kid says, "Yeah, you coming to the soccer game tonight, Dad?"
Yeah, right.
And that's really what's important.
Right.
It's a soccer game for the family, and they're working. The unemployment rate, they may not have great jobs, but the unemployment rate is down, around a little over 4%. So I think that's part of it, and I don't think any candidate has excited anyone.
No.
What's the tagline? If you find me a candidate where somebody repeats the tagline or the message, they will catch fire. The governor's problem, even though she talks, and we're going to have a conference at Bryan this week and talk about what those numbers really mean when you say you've gone from the 33rd to the 9th best economy, and who's doing it, and what the meaning of that is. Excuse me.
Is that Senator? Any famous United States senators?
Very famous one.
Yeah.
That's it's not catching. Catching on, and then you have the conflict. This is what I think going to be interesting in the Democrat race. Not only the progressive moderate split, but the first job of a governor is to run the state government. And you've seen a lot of ads on television by a PAC, which obviously is connected to the Republican side, pointing out all the miscues in running the government. Well, people look back, and that's not, there's not only one issue that's a confidence breaker, but it kind of builds, and so it's hard to get excited, and it's hard to focus.
Do
on
any of
messages.
these candidates, of what you've seen today, could any of them punch through, or any of them, could any of them pick up some significant momentum and start to capture people's attention?
Yeah, I think I think we have some capable people running. Certainly the governor has the gravitas to do it, but she has to get a lot of things straightened out before she can possibly do it. On the Republican side, I think there are a couple of candidates. If they would focus on the issues, if they would focus on a message and a theme of what they will do that will be better and different, they have that opportunity. So there's an acre of diamonds out there. There's all kind of opportunities
Sure.
to do something. It's early in the game. The primaries are in September, 90 days from now. So general election's not for 5 or 6 months. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunity, and we'll see what happens. The other problem they have is with so many people running, it's hard to get through the noise.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to blame the media on this, and this is not meant to be a shot at any particular media.
Go ahead, fire away.
No, it's not meant to be a shot. It's just because it's true. Trump. It starts with Trump and it goes down in our system. So instead of speaking and debating seriously some of the real issues confronting this country, everything's personalized. Trump is, if he's not 24/7, he's 24/5 now. So that noise is out there. We have candidates, trying to tear the other down by questioning their integrity. The rental spaces, is a good example.
Well, I think you've had, I don't know, I can't keep track. There's another one today, multiple complaints with the Board of Elections by different candidates. So, you're going to see this period of time where people are going to file complaints to imply guilt across the board. I think we're going to look at these things with a skeptical eye, that it's not just a cheap headline on a daily basis, because otherwise we're going to destroy all of them. None of them are going to have any trust, potential trust with the voters. So, I think they've made a strategic mistake in not using this period of time to talk about what the heck they're going to do for Rhode Island. I mean, I don't think we've received a multi-page, thoughtful white paper from any of the candidates today.
And this is the conflict. And the public is tired of 5-point plans. Whether it was Bill Clinton's or somebody else. I have a 5-point plan to solve this problem. Well, there was no chance in hell of that 5 points being enacted. If it was, you wouldn't know what it was going to do. So there's a fine line these candidates walk between not grabbing enough oxygen with my 5-point plan to clean up the environment, or
right,
whatever they want to do, versus breaking through the noise. And so it's really getting the word out that it's not the 5-point plan, but it's about leadership. And if I'm elected governor, these are my leadership capacities, and this is where I'm going to take the state. You don't tell me a 5-point plan. There are plenty of GPS systems now. We could read the map, but you have to let me know where you're taking the state. And I think that's really been the thing that's been missing from this conversation.
I agree 100%. Is there a question that when we have these folks on that you think we should consistently ask each of these candidates? What's the question?
Oh, the question is very simple. I should say that. That's kind of
whenever somebody says very simple, he's going to make it a three-tier question.
It's very simple. If you're elected governor, how are you going to make things better for me and my family? And really, how are you going to make things better for the middle class? Because the upper classes are doing fine. The lowest quintiles, striving to be the middle class, and the middle class has great anxiety. So the question is, how are you going to make things better for the middle class? And there was an interesting study done. I forget. It was done by Cato, and they asked the question, why was there so much resentment among the middle class? And they found that about 60% of the people either were hardworking middle class people bringing home an income, and then also in the almost middle class, in that 60%, there were people who were pretty much on the just living off public largesse, and their lifestyles weren't that much different.
Mm-hmm.
And that caused a tremendous amount of resentment. It wasn't resentment against the super rich, because the people at Cato argued that no one was mad about Bill Gates, making oodles of money because they like Microsoft, and no one was mad about Apple's making oodles of money because they like to play with their iPhones. But they were upset about people living the same type of life they were, the same quality of life that they were living, not working as hard, busting their butt. And so I think if the candidate breaks through and says, this is how things are going to be better for the middle class. And that's
We certainly don't hear that narrative right now. I want to thank you as always. We're off next week on Business Monday. It is 4th of July week. You will have to hold up your desires for more Money Man for a week. I want to thank the Money Man, Gary Sasse. Always tons of information, very valuable. And we're going to be right back in just a minute with Mr. Innovation, Saul Kaplan. We'll be right back in about 30 seconds.